Hey there, focused learners. Welcome to this explainer. If you're prepping for the Florida Real Estate Sales Associate exam, you already know the math and closing sections, right? Yeah, that's where dreams are either made or broken. Today, we're Happel the highly tested closing statement logic, prorations, and those tricky federal disclosures. We're going to expose the exact traps the examiners set so you can walk into that testing center completely bulletproof.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're covering the debit and credit logic, standard entries, prorations and delinquent taxes, federal disclosures, and then we'll wrap up with a practice quiz. Section 1, the debit and credit logic. Let's establish the golden rule of the ledger. To really master this, think of the closing statement kind of like a trip to the grocery store, but it's a double entry ledger. So a debit, that's a charge. It's money physically leaving your wallet, reducing the cash you actually take home. A credit is the exact opposite. It's cash received, or maybe money you've already paid in advance, like a gift card. Whenever you see a transaction on the exam, ask yourself this one simple question. Is this item draining someone's wallet or padding it?
Moving right along to Section 2, Standard Closing Statement Entries.
Let's map these standard entries out. Notice how the purchase price hits both sides. It's a debit to the buyer because they owe the money and a credit to the seller who's receiving it. But take a look at a new loan and the seller's mortgage payoff. A new loan reduces the cash the buyer actually has to bring to the table, making it strictly a credit to the buyer. On the flip side, paying off the seller's old mortgage, well, that drains their take-home profit, making it strictly a debit to the seller.
Now listen up, because here is a classic exam trap that catches people literally every single time. Earnest money. Candidates constantly assume earnest money is a credit to the seller, because, the seller eventually gets paid. But remember our grocery store logic. Earnest money is cash the buyer has already paid into escrow, so it simply reduces the remaining cash the buyer needs to bring to closing. It's a credit to the buyer only. There is absolutely zero entry on the seller's side of the ledger for this. No way, don't fall for it. All right, Section 3, prorations and delinquent taxes. Let's look at items that get split.
So the absolutely crucial point for your test is the Florida day of closing rule. In Florida, the day of closing belongs entirely to the buyer. This means when you're counting days for prorated expenses, like property taxes, the seller is only charged up to the day before the closing date. And because Florida property taxes are paid in arrears, meaning they're paid at the very end of the year for the year that just passed, the seller has to reimburse the buyer for the portion of the year the seller actually lived in the home.
Now, you've got to contrast standard prorated taxes with delinquent prior year taxes. Prorated current year taxes are a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer because the seller is just handing that money over for the buyer to pay later on in November. But think of delinquent prior year taxes as a massive financial anchor. They represent a pre-existing lien. They are never shared, never prorated. They have to be paid in full to the county to clear the title, making them strictly a debit to the seller only.
Okay, shifting gears to Section 4, Required Federal Disclosures.
Under TRID rules, timing is absolutely everything. The lender must provide the borrower with a loan estimate detailing the loan terms and estimated closing costs within 3 business days of receiving a completed loan application. Then, the final closing disclosure, or the CD, which itemizes all those actual closing costs, well, that's got to be delivered to the borrower at least 3 business days before the consummation or closing of the loan.
Furthermore, under the Truth in Lending Act or Regulation Z, how you advertise financing really matters. Think of specific numbers as a legal tripwire. Advertising a $300 monthly payment or 5% down, that acts as a triggering term. You step on that wire and you legally mandate the full disclosure of all financial terms of the loan in that ad, including the APR. But using general fluffy phrases like low down payment or simply stating the APR alone, those are safe zones and they don't trigger any further disclosures.
All right, Section 5. It is time for our interactive practice quiz. I'm going to read a prompt, and I want you to hit pause and try to solve it yourself before I reveal the answer.
Question 1. At closing, how is the buyer's earnest money deposit entered on a standard Florida settlement statement? Take a quick second to lock in your answer.
Okay, the answer is a credit to the buyer only. The common trap examiners use here is trying to trick you into giving that credit to the seller, or maybe making it a debit to the buyer. But remember the secret. It's just money the buyer has already paid into escrow, which simply reduces the remaining cash they need to close the deal.
Let's move to question 2. An advertisement states, purchase this unit today with monthly payments of only $1,250.
What does this trigger under TILA and Regulation Z? Go ahead and hit pause.
And the answer is, it triggers the mandatory full disclosure of all loan terms, including the APR. Specifying a precise dollar amount for a monthly payment is a strictly regulated triggering term. The trap here is assuming that stating a monthly payment all by itself is somehow compliant without the rest of the financial details. Not the case.
Question 3. A Florida home closes on May 10th. The current year property taxes are unpaid. How is this prorated on the closing statement? Grab a piece of scratch paper and work this one out.
All right, because taxes are paid in arrears, it is a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. The seller owes the buyer for the days they live there. The massive exam trap here is miscounting the days. Remember, the buyer owns May 10th in Florida, so the seller only pays up through May 9th.
Final question. A seller has delinquent property taxes of $572 for prior years. How will this exactly appear on the closing statement ledger? Give it your absolute best guess before we finish up.
The answer is exclusively a debit to the seller of $572. There is no entry for the buyer at all. The trap candidates fall into is attempting to prorate these taxes. But remember our financial anchor concept, right? Delinquent taxes are a pre-existing lien that must be paid in full to clear the title, so they are never, ever prorated. To summarize our hacking session today, debits are charges that drain cash, credits represent cash entering the picture, and in Florida, the day of closing is always owned by the buyer. Lock these 3 rules in, and the math section shifts from a major headache to a highly predictable point-scoring machine. You've just mastered the closing ledger and federal disclosures. But when it comes to encumbrances, do you know the strict timelines that make or break a Florida construction lien? That 90-day notice of commencement deadline is waiting for you on the exam. So, are you ready for it? Until next time, keep studying smart, focused learners.